When I come around, got the whole thing wobbin'.
Now we go into our first topic after headlines: new faces and new places. This is where me and Antoine discuss coaches and certain players transferring that you will see this upcoming season. Now, we'll first start off with coaches. There's a long list of new head coaches in places. I've given them certain grades. Antoine will discuss how he feels about them fitting in at their new place. First and foremost, we got Scott Frost going back to his alma mater when he played quarterback at Nebraska. I personally gave this an A grade for Nebraska. And notable background information of Scott Frost: he was the Oregon's offensive coordinator from 2013 to 2015. Previously was their wide receivers coach. Went to USF, went 6-7 at 2016. In 2017, they are supposedly national champs. I don't know if you saw that, but they actually had a parade for that, going undefeated.
Yeah, of course.
What are your thoughts on Scott Frost going to Nebraska?
It almost seemed like writing on the wall halfway through the season, because Nebraska fans were already talking about it when they were talking about getting rid of Mike Riley, which I did not like the hire of Mike Riley, period. This cannot be worse than the Mike Riley hire, because when the Mike Riley hire happened, it was horrible. Scott Frost, he's a Nebraska guy. He went undefeated. He's going to bring in the fans in, a new hope and things of that nature. And in Nebraska, where football is king, they need a guy who gives them hope, and that's what Scott Frost provides for them. He's also going to probably be able to recruit outside of the state really well, because Nebraska's not going to be just feeding in from the in-state kind of guys. We'll see what he could do at this bigger stage at Nebraska, facing a lot of Big Ten opponents out there. And Nebraska's they've got their work cut out for them.
Right. May not be able to contend once we talk about the Big Ten Conference, but Nebraska is on the rise, and Scott Frost, who has done with more with less when he was at USCF out there, but now that he's at a notable program who can still recruit well, they do still get 4-star guys, sometimes 5-star guys, because of the legacy of Nebraska. I do expect him to do really well there. Dan Mullen is our next coach. Going back to Florida, a whole lot of guys are going back to where they previously were successful at. Dan Mullen goes to Florida. He was Florida's ex-OC when they won championships there. You heard of a guy that they kind of won with, Tim Tebow, out there. I gave this an A grade as well, too.
Oh, yeah, Dan Mullen has been rumored to go to Florida for so long, because he's had so much success at a place where in the SEC, most coaches don't have success in Mississippi State. And he's been able to get the best of what he could out of Mississippi State, kind of squeezed almost all his juices into that one, where they were even able to go to an Orange Bowl for a year. I think they were number one ranked team at a point.
Oh, one time they were the number one.
They were the number one ranked team at Mississippi State, and I really didn't think that was really capable, considering you play in the SEC West. And he was able to do all he could. And there's only a certain level you can reach at Mississippi State that you ultimately at Florida you can create a dynasty. I don't really think at Mississippi State you can do the same thing.
Right. I believe I 100% agree with you that he literally got all that he could out of Mississippi State. There was nothing more he can do there. He made guys like Dak Prescott and Nick Fitzgerald play to a much higher level with his offense. And I think going back to Florida, where it's like pretty much what we said about Scott Frost, where you have more tools in recruiting, you're going to get 5-star notable guys. They were getting 5-star notable guys when they were barely even relevant at one point with the Will Muschamp era.
Mm-hmm.
And they bring back and he knows what that Florida style of play is. When they won national championships, he knows what types of players he can fit there. And I think you may see Florida come back into Providence, and we're going to talk about them later on in the SEC preview. Chip Kelly goes to UCLA, back to the Pac-12. Oregon's best coach, the father of the modern day spread offense. Now, here's the thing about this. There's something that me and you have discussed before about now that he's going back to UCLA and over there in the Pac-12 where almost everybody runs some sort of spread that came from his sort of concepts, nobody's going to be shell-shocked by this, right?
No.
By his offense. His offense is pretty much something everybody has literally faced in practice at this point,
Yeah.
and also offensive concepts that they even run themselves.
Yeah, like everybody's doing what Chip Kelly did, and that's kind of the reason why Oregon lost with Mark Helfrich.
Right.
Yeah, with Mark Helfrich, where they kind of lost their mojo was because that offense was no longer a shell shock to the system of what they do. So he might have to get a little bit more creative this stint around, more so than what he had the last one.
Right. Do you believe it's an upgrade in his recruiting way of going to? Is UCLA a bigger platform than Oregon?
Oh, of course. But you might not be able to sell facilities the same way as Oregon, but as far as location, the prestige around it, academics, probably could sell UCLA a little bit higher than you can Oregon. Definitely, especially the kids outside of the state. It's a better known school as well, too. And it's LA. Come on, it's Los Angeles comparing it to going out to Eugene, Oregon. It's a little bit easier to recruit at UCLA than it is at Oregon, and ultimately it's still on the West Coast. And I thought it was a good hire. It's just maybe UCLA fans are going to have to be a little bit patient with this team.
Right. Jimbo Fisher goes to Texas A&M. I rank this in A, all-time winningest coach at Florida State, and he's a great recruiter. That's one thing I've always known about Jimbo Fisher. There at Tech, and I think at Texas A&M, it's a bit of an odd hire. You know, a lot of people penciled him to go to LSU over there, but he went to Texas A&M. How do you feel about that situation of him going to A&M?
I don't think that he upgraded for himself. I wouldn't have probably given an A. For A&M, for A&M, it's a higher, is an A. You know,
right.
But for himself, I think that he kind of moved a little bit backwards because he's going to have to try to recruit his own style of players. They don't necessarily play the way that Jimbo Fisher's teams were playing. They played a little bit more open spread, air raid kind of philosophy with Kevin Sumlin, and now they're going to kind of go back into, you know, 2 tight ends, maybe a running back in the backfield, maybe a quarterback under center, you know, play a little bit more conventional, actually huddle. Those players he's going to have to recruit. So it might actually take him some time to break into the mold of the rest of the SEC, you know. And it'd be a nice thing, good thing that he has a lot of young players, you know, where he can kind of mold in his own image.
Right. And later on, you're going to hear our bust about impact freshmen in the SEC. But this, little tease for it, I think Jimbo Fisher, there's going to be a lot of true freshmen and redshirt freshmen that are going to be seeing the field a lot for Jimbo Fisher this year. We'll run down the list. It really goes down to notable names, really big-time names. Now we kind of go into that Tier 2 to Tier 3. Willie Taggart at Florida State. Going back to Florida State. I feel like this is their bridge head coach. By bridge head coach means it's kind of like you're going away from you're going away from your ex that you really loved in Jimbo Fisher, and you're kind of still not over him because he kind of won you some championships. You know, all-time winningest coach there. So you kind of need a guy to help you ease your way into your next one. I think Willie Taggart that's what he is at Florida State. Now,
I don't think that's the plan for him.
Right.
I don't necessarily think that's the plan for him. They want Willie Taggart to succeed. They want him to be their long-term coach. But Taggart, he jumped ship, so it's not even out of the possibility of the realm that Florida State will jump ship from him. But it's kind of similar to the Jimbo Fisher situation at Texas A&M, where he also has to try to start bringing in his own kind of guys. And then find the leaders that he wants, as opposed to the Jimbo Fisher guys, you know.
Right.
And it's also going to be interesting to see Florida State having to go more so of this spread offense, because I can't remember a time where Florida State really ever had a spread. It went from the Bobby Bowden years where they were kind of still playing the same way that they played with Jimbo Fisher. So it's going to be interesting on offense as well, too, and what they could do as far as that.
Right. Joe Moorhead, a little bit of an unknown to the common fan base. He was Penn State's old offensive coordinator. He's going to be there replacing Dan Mullen at Mississippi State. Now, it's a head coaching gig for him. I think seeing the explosive offense he had there at Penn State. Now, the difference is the talent that he's going to be getting there at Mississippi State compared to Penn State. It's going to be relatively a big drop-off, you know. He does inherit Nick Fitzgerald, a good quarterback, but that's really about it I can say about Joe Moorhead. Anything you would like to add on that hire?
Oh no, I concur to your
right.
To your
Now, Chad Morris, this is an interesting one. Arkansas. Chad Morris is best known to one of Clemson's earliest offensive coordinators under Dabo Swinney, and he went first to SMU, running that air raid out there. Relatively, or that spread concept. Now Arkansas goes from a heavy power running team to a spread team, almost complete opposites on the spectrum. How do you feel about this hire at Arkansas?
I feel the same way as well too. I think that's a solid hire over down there at Arkansas. It's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit awkward, but it's the same situation. It's transitioning. You got to give it time. Fans can't get rowdy about having a 5-7 year this year or something of that nature, because it can get better.
Right.
I'm willing to sacrifice that first year if we're going to get 5-6 solid years after that.
Right. Then we'll run down the list here. Kevin Sumlin to Arizona. Jeremy Pruitt, the old defensive coordinator at Tennessee and Florida State. Mario Cristobal stays at Oregon, was the interim head coach there, and Herm Edwards goes to Arizona State. Any of those guys you would like to talk about? Before?
I found the Herm Edwards thing kind of intriguing, because this is a guy who's also been out of coaching. Not only he's been out of coaching, he's never really coached college football. So this is a really far out thing, but Herm Edwards has always been a great speaker, and he's always been able to teach young people in the right way how to do things. So if you're hiring a coach on morale, you couldn't have hired a better guy than Herm Edwards, who attended the same high school I did in California as well, to Monterey High School in California. So he has his camp there every year and whatnot. So I know about how he deals with kids, and he's always been involved hands-on with kids. So you're going to get a lot of really good people coming out of Arizona State. But as far as football wins and losses, I really don't know how it's going to fare. I don't know what kind of staff he has hired necessarily, the guys that he's put in place to ultimately succeed. Because he's not going to be calling the plays out there. He's not going to be doing all that type of thing. He's going to be more hands-on to the head coaches and players, and focusing on as a team together as a whole, as opposed to just focusing in on one side of the ball or anything of that nature. It's not going to be X's and O's out there. It's going to be about being an actual head coach for him. Right,
exactly. I 100% agree on that. We don't know what his coaching staff is, and if he does put in a great coaching staff, then the D- grade that I gave him may change around. But still, it is hard, because Arizona State already, you can already look in the Pac-12 South is going to be one of the lower teams on that list, you know, over there, even competing against Kevin Sumlin, who is a good hire there at Arizona to fit their scheme out there. Now, after all that, the coaches, now we get to talk about...
I wanted to bring up one more guy.
Yeah, go ahead.
But, and I want to ask you a question. What do you think of Sonny Dykes going to SMU? I know this is in a big Power 5 school, but Sonny Dykes, how about him?
Well, it's essentially it's a relatively easy transition from SMU. One, they were an air raid school before Chad Morris got there. Then they kind of still stuck to that. Now you bring in the bear raid offense there at SMU. So it's kind of like you are still the same. You hire the same guys over and over again, which obviously SMU doesn't have a problem with. I believe they're in the American Conference, right? The AAC.
Yeah.
You're competing against the UCF, I believe, and I don't really know how. Chad Morris didn't have a winning season, I believe, at SMU, or he has an all-time.
We had a couple of them back to back.
Oh, okay. Well, it's gonna be different. I mean, not different, but it's gonna be interesting to see how successful Sonny Dykes is gonna be, relatively keeping the same concepts there at SMU. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, I agree, but I think that it's going to be a little bit less balanced than SMU was in the past, where SMU was a little bit more had a little bit more runs. It's going to be a little bit more pass than what Chad Morris was. It's going to be a little bit more pass than what Chad Morris designed that team.
Yeah, it's going to be like 95 to not.
You still can keep the same exact players, you know. A slot receiver, still a slot receiver. A flanker, still a flanker. In both of the offenses, there's some similarities to their offenses, but it's just going to be the amount of how many runs you do compared to passes, and how many zone runs and power blocks, and it's just minor little details here that are going to change.
Right.
Ultimately, and I think that this is a gateway job for him to get another shot at one of the big programs anyway. So I don't think it's going to last long anyway, as those other jobs that we were talking about where we're looking long term. This one might just actually be a short term one. Get himself a real good 9-win season and get out of there.
Right, exactly. I agree with you 100%. They may run like 95 to 100% of all offensive plays are going to be passing out there in Dallas for Southern Methodist. Now we go to players and new faces. There are some players here we may have already discussed about. Notable one we talked about already is Shea Patterson out there going to Michigan. Already kind of discussed that in our last podcast, and please check out our last video, especially our college football headlines, where we covered that subject of Shea Patterson being the new Michigan man on campus. Shea Patterson there won. Jim Harbaugh inherited probably his most talented quarterback in college recruiting. Shea Patterson pretty much penciled into the starter. There's another guy on this list. Him transferring there made another guy transfer. Wilton Speight goes to Michigan. From Michigan to UCLA. My bad. How do you feel about those two guys transferring?
Yeah, Shea Patterson had a big-time impact last year. In just 10 games, I believe he threw over 3,000 yards and over 20 touchdowns in just 10 games out there at Ole Miss. So they'll definitely get somebody who they can move around, and Harbaugh will get to show his creativity again at the quarterback, because it's been the theme for Michigan. Like, they keep switching quarterbacks. They're going to have to find their guy, and it hasn't worked for transfers, and they haven't recruited the guy that they wanted yet. So, Will Speight experiment obviously wasn't working out, and he always had a short leash anyways at Michigan, because Harbaugh was quick to bench him after a couple of interceptions in the first half last year, you know. So there was always the writing in the wall that they didn't always see eye to eye. Right. And eventually they had to move on. I think that UCLA was a horrible choice, because I don't necessarily think that Chip Kelly is his ideal coach. I would have thought that he would have wanted somebody who's a little bit more athletic. Now, if you had told me Shea Patterson had gone to UCLA and Will Speight has stayed at Michigan, that would have made more sense, you know?
Right.
But Will Speight's not his ideal guy at UCLA, but he'll have to win that job over down there too. So competition's still on.
Right.
For him.
Here's some notable guys LSU has recruited through transferring. Jonathan Giles, one of the 1,000-yard receivers. Right.
Yes.
Brendan Fedeco. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Defensive lineman from Texas Tech, a notable 5-star guy, going to LSU. And Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's a guy we also talked about previously, going to Ohio State to LSU. On paper, these are some good transfers for LSU. Now, you guys are going to hear later on our SEC preview about how we feel about LSU. And ultimately, I think these are some great players that they're getting. The problem is still the fact that the offensive play and calling that may be going there at Baton Rouge. I still have almost complete to no faith in the play calling and also developing offensive players, especially at the quarterback position. They still are an immensely talented team. The thing is, on paper, they look good. It's just the fact that it's on paper, not on the field. How do you feel about these guys going to LSU?
Yeah, I thought that LSU's trying to get veteran guys out there at least, because LSU has always had this mantra of losing guys early to the NFL, but the talent level has kind of started dropping off as well too. So it's not easy to just replace that guy anymore that goes on to the NFL and get his replacement as like it used to be in early Les Miles years. So I think this graduate transfer thing, you're getting guys who come in and immediately impact you, that's already played college football, that's old enough, that already understand the college lifestyle. It's great for them. And we'll continue obviously talking about this in the FCC preview about LSU and where their problems lie and where their program is going to move forward from this point.
Right. Terry Wilson, the number one JUCO-rated quarterback, is going to Kentucky. We're probably going to see a lot of him, an explosive player there. Ricky Town goes from a junior college going to Pitt. Previously enrolled at USC, then went to Arkansas, didn't handle it there, went to junior college, now going to Pittsburgh. Keller Chris, Stanford.
From Stanford to go to Tennessee, that's one of the big ones, the big headliners.
Yeah, Blake Barnett, Arizona State to USF. That was recently announced. Dallas Warmack, younger brother of Chance Warmack. Going to Alabama to Oregon. Preston Williams, a notable number one wide receiver in his respective class, from Tennessee to Colorado State. And Brady White from Arizona State to Memphis.
Everyone, you might want to. People may have forgotten this guy. He was a big deal before he got hurt. John Hillman from Boston College. He's going to Rutgers. He's transferring to Rutgers.
Right.
He ended up kind of getting beat out by A.J. Dillon because A.J. Dillon had a monster year and Hillman never was able to find his way through. So, yeah, I think that it was the right decision for him to just go on ahead and transfer. And I thought this was a great school, a great location for him.
Out of all these notable guys that we have mentioned transferring, which one intrigues you the most, and which one do you think they're going to succeed at a new place?
I'm going to have to go with I'm actually going to go here with an offensive lineman that we did not name.
Go ahead.
Calvin Anderson, offensive lineman from Rice. He's transferring to Texas.
Okay.
He's going to be replacing Connor Williams. He's a solid left tackle. He's going to be doing some of the stuff. He's a little bit better in pass protection as far as moving his feet, but he's not the run blocker. Obviously, Connor Williams is. Connor Williams obviously was a second-round draft pick. It's kind of hard to compare and replace a guy of that nature. So he's not going to be that run fit, and obviously Texas is a run-first team. So that's the one I think is going to be the biggest impact out of
all new transfers, right?
All the transfers that happens.
The most intriguing for you.
I think that's also going to be able to succeed is maybe Keller Chris out there at Tennessee, because we all know that what they're going to try to go do at Tennessee, they're going to be trying to have the quarterback manage the game, and Keller Chris can probably do that coming out of Stanford out there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I 100% agree on that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.